All right, thanks, James. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our latest webinar from GAIA. This one is on the back of an article that we wrote for Call Center Helper, which was about AI sovereignty. And there's some legislation coming in from the EU on the 2nd of August, which is going to affect all sorts of people with a large fine or a part of their revenue that whichever's largest, basically. So we're going to discuss that. It's going to be a very interesting topic. With me today, I've got Chris Marron, Tim Banting, and Don Hadaway, all experts in the field who helped contribute to that article. So I'd like to kick off really by asking the panel, what is AI sovereignty in your understanding? Go, Tim.
So the EU AI Act's about how AI tools get built and run. So the focus is on things like risk, keeping humans in the loop, being clear when AI is
moment, Tim. Let's just stop you for a moment. So AI sovereignty is about how you keep the data within that sovereign area. Yes.
Well, there's a sort of, these terms are getting a little bit mixed up. So we've got the EU AI Act and we've got EU sovereignty. So the EU AI Act is about how AI tools get built and run. And so from the 2nd of August, businesses need to be transparent about when they use AI. So if you're a EU citizen, you need to know when you're talking to a chatbot, any AI generated media, you need to label it. And any users need to be told when they're using things like emotion recognition, biometric categories, those sorts of systems that are being used on them. So that's the stuff that is due in a couple of days' time. The Brussels decided to push back some of the high risk stuff, like how you automate hiring and firing and credit scoring. That's been pushed back until December 2027. So that's the EU AI Act. The EU sovereignty is about when you record a meeting or take a call or use AI to generate a summary, you're dealing with personal data. Who said what? And all of that is subject to GDPR and Article 32 of the Data Act, the EU Data Act. So when an American firm handles things like transcripts using Zoom, Microsoft, Cisco, Google, because they're US firms, the US Cloud Act applies. And that means that US authorities can demand access to that data, even if your recordings never leave a data center in Frankfurt or Dublin. So these two acts don't really conflict directly, but they create a bit of a bind for any vendor that's caught between them, because the EU law requires resistance to foreign legal demands, while US law requires compliance with the US Cloud Act. So a vendor can't do both. So they're really at loggerheads with each other. So sovereignty is about legal jurisdiction, which government can sort of force a vendor to hand over data, override a system, restrict access, even when that data doesn't cross a border. And that's what we're looking at today, this whole area around sovereignty and the legal jurisdiction in the EU.
I mean, sovereignty is a pretty broad term, and those acts really have sort of formed a catalyst for all the other things that sit below it. Because if you asked before these acts were around, the sovereignty was quite a broad term. So you've got, full sovereignty, which is data models, infrastructure, et cetera, that stay within national borders. Hybrid sovereignty, where you've got, I guess, specific workloads or specific data that stays in a region, or block sovereignty, so the EU type thing, where it's not in a country, but it's in a trading block or a regional block, such as the EU. And then you've got sector-specific stuff where you have things like defense or healthcare or whatever, where actually that data is not allowed to leave a particular country. So it's horribly conflated, and it's turning very combative now that, as Tim was saying, now that you've got the US version of the EU, their own AI Act, which basically means that anything that they touch or think they touch that's using their infrastructure, they can have at it and go, yeah, give me access, do what you like. But no need to talk to anybody. Just go fill your boots. Whereas the EU Act is not quite as combative, and it's really there more aimed at protecting people's interest and knowing that you are interacting with AI, rather than don't give Johnny Foreigner my access. So they're quite different stances, but yeah, it all revolving around the AI and its uses, and who uses it, who has access to it, and who can demand access to data that it holds.
Yeah, building on what Don said there, what matters, there's other things. So what matters is where the EU person physically is sat during the call. So if you're sat in the EU when you record them, GDPR applies to you, even if you're a US company recording on US servers. So you have to treat that data in the way that GDPR requires you to do so. So you need a proper legal basis for that recording, rights like access and deletion for that person. So the bottom line is, if you're a contact center, if someone's dialing in from the EU, you've got to assume that GDPR applies to them, and you've got to check this thing called a transfer mechanism sorted out. So, you've got to have things like EU standard contractual clauses and US certification for data privacy frameworks. All of those sorts of things are just an absolute minefield. It's extremely difficult. I can see why people are moving to email and chat, because maybe that's an easier way. The channel's
I always thought Royal Mail was pretty good myself, but there you go.
Doesn't
go back to carrier pigeons.
Affect email as well? So won't the AI sovereignty also affect email?
It affects everything pretty much.
That's a question to Chris.
Sorry.
Yes. Yeah, so it affects everything. And there is a challenge here for a lot of vendors in that when you look at the number of web domains that use Gmail or Outlook for their internet provider across Europe, you look at the Netherlands, it's over 90%. You look at Europe as a whole, it's over 80%. The vast majority of companies are putting their email on US providers. So there's a little bit of a kind of challenge there where on the one hand, as contact centers, we're really concerned about data and customer control, and it's a big focus. Customers want to know that they are protected, and authorities want to know that businesses are taking proper care of their customers. But then there's this kind of email server that no one quite talks about that just happens to be with Microsoft, because there's not a lot of alternative options. I mean, there's a few who are on Zoho. There are some other domains, but it's primarily Google and Microsoft. So there is a real tension there, and it's a particular focus in the contact center because we deal with an awful lot of sensitive information. We deal with an awful lot of customers, and that in itself presents quite a challenge. But we're also then in a situation where we are much more looked at by customers, much higher profile, because as a brand, if someone does find out, hey, my data's leaked, that falls on customer service. So there's both all the customers looking at us and the handling of the sensitive data that the contact center has to consider.
Cool. So obviously a very, very large amount of data there that we're talking about, but going back to your point there, Chris, and this is to the rest of the panel, where exactly are contact centers exposed? What sort of material and AI are they using and data that could be exposed to that?
So I'll jump straight in on that one, I guess, although because for contact centers, particularly with AI, you get an added challenge. So as a contact center, when you're using an AI tool, generally the providers want to make very certain that that AI tool doesn't hallucinate and that it responds in a very rapid way. So you tend to have a set of different agents acting together. So what you'll have is you will have a compliance kind of model, which says, hey, is this a fraud attempt that the customer's making? Is there a prompt injection trying to come in here? There's generally an element of security that goes in there. Then you generally have a kind of arbiter at the top that's deciding what sort of interaction is this. So when this interaction comes into me as a virtual agent, is the customer asking about billing? Are they asking about returns? Are they asking? It's working out what different flows the interaction should go down, and then it's sending that interaction down the flow, and it's monitoring as it goes forward to say, okay, well, if that changes, do I need to go from having a billing agent flow to pulling in the refunds agent because the customer suddenly said, hey, by the way, can I get a refund? So there's multiple agents, and those agents are also integrating with multiple systems. And that means when you start tracing where the data goes, suddenly it's not just, hey, I have a contact center with NICE. You start looking at, well, okay, what underlying AI model's being pulled in? And where is that data going? And do I have a Salesforce integration? And am I calling that? Do I have a back office system that I'm calling in? The MCP means data starts moving in lots of ways that you have to consider and be aware of as well.
Yeah, you don't know where your golden record is. You've got multiple sources. It could be HubSpot for marketing. It could be Salesforce for sales. It could be something else it could be ServiceNow. It could be anything.
But also, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Carry on.
No, I was just going to say, so which one's your central source? Which one's your golden record? So this is where it starts getting tricky. And we've seen all sorts of legal test cases already. There was one in Canada with someone that asked an AI chatbot, am I eligible for a refund on Air Canada? And the AI bot said yes, and they didn't get the refund. It got taken to court, and the judge said, well, it's like a digital employee. You're responsible for that. Over to you, Tom.
No, what I was going to say, the other sort of place where there's increasing danger is especially with the use of recording, analytics, etc. It's really what you're doing with that real-time information. So one of the things that's prohibited is what they call real-time biometric surveillance. So yes, you are going to be recording calls. Yes, you are going to be analyzing it in a certain way, but there are limits on what analysis you can do. So I know there's vulnerability and various other things, but there are exceptions and narrow exceptions, but you have to make sure that actually what you're not doing are things like social scoring people, or as I say, real-time biometric stuff. Is it this person? What they're taking or looking at their biometrics in a more subliminal way, rather than just saying, yes, it's a real person. Is this person the person we think it is, and taking lots of biometric measurements, etc. So there are real limits to that, and whether it's in the EU or Germany or UK or wherever else, those things are going to be completely banned outright. So, but with limits to what you can do in terms of that surveillance of people. So yeah, there's a few tripwires there.
So what does this all mean? We'll come on to what it means for vendors in a second, but what does this mean for customers right now? With specific focus on the 2nd of August deadline, Tim. You're on mute, Tim.
I do beg your pardon. Yeah, lip. Now that would be good if someone could read my lips, or maybe not so. Beg your pardon. Well, so a couple of days' time, businesses have got to be transparent about when they use AI. They've got to disclose when they're talking to a chatbot. They've got to show that AI-generated content is labeled as such. You've got to be told when you've got that emotion recognition or biometric categorization, all of that stuff. You've got to know that that's running in the background. That sort of level. So that's the big one. You've got to know when you're talking to an AI bot. So you can't be like some of these vendors that pretend you're speaking to an AI receptionist, or pretend that you're speaking to Fred in the call center or Jane in the call center. You've got to say, hi, my name is whatever. I'm an AI bot here to help you. That's all got to be sorted out by next week.
So, Tim, are you saying that if they don't have that sorted out, those companies will be fined?
Well, I have a feeling that could be a test case that gets brought into Brussels very quickly. So, yeah, these are the transparency ones. The big ones for high risk systems, like, say, for example, Zoom and BrightHire, which is a HR sort of automated hiring capability. That's got until the end of December in 2027. So there's the high risk stuff that's pushed back. The transparency stuff, disclosing when you're talking to AI, that comes into effect in a few days' time.
For the early stuff, I think it's not a vast amount of heavy lifting to actually disclose, because a lot of the stuff that is the low risk stuff is pretty easy to do. The challenge is inventory, because a lot of organizations literally have no clue which part of their system, whether it's AI, not AI, where does this go? What? So having an inventory of what your AI systems are, how they're interacting with. I know it doesn't give you a fat lot of time, but yeah, the sooner it's done, the better. And that's
What I find confusing with all this is that EU AI Act, is it enforcement or is it guidance?
It's enforcement.
It's
I think
enforcement. It's a law from
got
Brussels.
It's got big teeth as well. Yeah.
And the
So
big
if that
thing
is
is
truly enforcement, then we're going to see a lot of heavy fines coming through, because I don't think people are ready for this, are they?
well, we are. And the interesting thing is, it's not the vendor that gets the fine; it's the person that implements the solution. So if I'm, a tourist travel agency, if I'm a bank in the UK, I get hit with a fine. It's not that I've used NICE or Genesis or anyone else. That's me. That's down to me. I get hit with that big fine.
Other contact centers are available, by the way.
They are indeed.
I think a lot of it is with the rigor or vigor that the EU decide to pursue this. My expectation is that they will go slow initially and be more warning, but I don't know. They could go guns blazing, and go, right, we got a hit list to go at on this day. Fact is, they're all on holiday right now, so it probably won't be.
Yeah,
So,
Europe's closed for August.
Yeah, so
that's the reason why they chose August.
That kind of casual racism to our European friends.
I'm in Sweden. It's not casual. I can walk out in the stand in the middle of the road.
Can we just stop there? Because I'm a bit frightened of litigation from that particular comment. But to continue on the theme of sovereignty and enforcement or guidance,
yeah,
if you are correct, and then they need to pursue this with vigor, and they've already stated this is enforcement, then they will have an awful amount of breaches coming through, will they not?
Quite potentially. Now, that will depend on how rigorously they chase enforcement, because a lot of contact centers are not currently compliant. There's a lot of cases where you talk to a chatbot and it does not tell you that it's a chatbot. Now, my gut feeling, and it is purely a gut feeling, but my gut feeling is that if you're using a very obviously chatbot kind of chatbot where it's a clear machine voice and so on, you are less at risk than if you're using a highly sophisticated, almost indistinguishable from a human kind of AI and still not notifying your customers. But there's also, beyond just the potential compliance risks from the EU and the Data Act, there's the whole national and EU-wide regulation around sovereignty that already exists and that's already in place. So NIS2 and DORA and all of those sorts of things. There's actually a lot of legislation now out there that companies need to think about and need to be compliant with. And sometimes, if you're a multinational spread across Europe with operations in France and operations in Germany, they start to even be a little bit contradictory and conflicting within the EU, let alone when you look at US Cloud Act versus EU. So it's really something that leaders need to get some advice on and need to get some clarity on that's specific to their business and their use case, because some regulations won't apply to you, some will. Now, some are completely general, so AI Act, that's everyone, but some are more focused as well.
Yeah, just to give a bit of context, Ian. So the turning point for a lot of people came back in June last year. So Microsoft's France's legal director dropped a bit of a bombshell at a French Senate inquiry when he admitted that Microsoft couldn't promise that the data sitting in French servers would stay out of the US hands without local approval. So that was a bit of a bombshell, a mic drop moment, if you were. And that sort of single admission blew the whole issue wide open for EU enterprises. So we saw things in the news like France ditching any US-based unified communication service in favor of their own. So they've created this one called Visio, dropping Microsoft Teams and Zoom. They said, we don't want that. We're going to create our own, because they're really quite concerned about what's happening. And what's happening is the EU Cloud and AI Development Act that was proposed back in June, very shortly after this bombshell, Brussels wrote this to fix that sort of foreign access problem. So they created this 4-level framework for cloud security so buyers can sort of get some understanding as to the amount of foreign risk they're inheriting or they're taking on. So the Commission's been really explicit here. They're keeping outside governments from using these sort of extraterritorial laws to pull the plug on EU systems. So it's really putting a big blocker on things. And I think this is what's going to happen is we're going to have a lot of EU companies that will just be putting the brakes on things. This move fast and break things mentality in the US, which is great for software development, has hit this bit of a brick wall called legal and legislative, if I can say that correctly.
Yeah.
And
Hold on a second, Chris. So, I mean, we talk about all this like it's actually going to happen, but I mean, cast your minds back to a couple of years ago, and we were all getting, excited about GDPR and the fines that were coming with GDPR. I can't remember very many fines actually coming through with GDPR. Is this the same sort of scenario where we've got a lot of hype, but it won't actually be enforced?
I mean, I would jump in here because we say we didn't see a lot of fines, but Meta was fined 1.2 billion for GDPR. Amazon was fined 746 million. TikTok was fined 530 million. Meta was fined again 405 million and 390 million. Now there's a little bit of Meta continuing to keep up, but there were a whole pile of fairly large examples that did come up, and yes, some of them were appealed and they went. So there is some enforcement. Now, some companies have said, you know what, it's worth the risk with GDPR. We'll take the risk that we won't be fined that much. And there haven't been a ton of gigantic fines, but there have been enough headline-catching ones that that there are some good headlines about it. Whether that will continue to be the case now, I would actually make an argument that we're going to see more of it. And part of it is the EU increasingly sees data sovereignty as a critical element to economic independence. So where the digital economy is increasingly important as part of the overall economy, there is a view in the EU that therefore the EU must retain control of that digital economy. And if they must retain control of that digital economy, then the US is not seen as the reliable and dependable partner that it perhaps previously was. Yeah. So there is seen as more of a need to drive it and more of a need to drive compliance. So that pendulum is not only swinging, but it's accelerating a little bit, where Europe is really trying to push hard. And with GDPR, there was quite an effort not to be combative with the US. It was okay, there are some regulations, but a US provider can absolutely still sell in Europe. They just have to adhere to the regulations.
Are you saying there's been a breakdown in trust, Chris? Is this your point?
I think that would be fair to say.
What do you think about that, Dom?
I think there's been an erosion in trust rather than a complete breakdown.
Yes.
I think with the current administration and really with all the political moves going on in Europe, where before nobody thought about it, Microsoft, Amazon, Oracle, whichever one you pick, people thought, you didn't think twice that was actually going on a very long piece of string to the US. And okay, it may not be residing in the data center, but they were the people with the control strings. With the current administration, where the threats and fines, and I think it was the EU prosecutor who had his email turned off because he was in the process of finding Microsoft. So those sorts of things, those sorts of practices have lit up with a very bright light the fact that actually Europe and a lot of the world is dependent on systems that they have zero control over. So suddenly sovereignty, having the ability to control, the ability to retain and manage data in a way that is in keeping with European values or with European law is far more important now than it ever was, because nobody thought about it before. But fast forward from say 2 or 3 years ago to now, and accelerating as Chris said, This is becoming more and more of a topic. And to your point, Ian, actually, the funny thing is that will this be a big, lots of people getting fined thing? It's a tool that has been put in place. That tool can be waiting to work or start working immediately. My guess is it'll wait to work, and when it hits, it won't be small. And unfortunately, it could be used as a political tool also, depending on who goes after what for who, for wherever. But once it's in law, it's in law. There are many laws that exist that nobody bothers to enforce, but there are many laws that people do.
Yeah, I mean, just to summarize the 2 points that both of you made, there's 2 things going on here. One, there's EU legislation. That's law.
Yeah.
The second one is the breakdown in trust that we've seen over the last year, which has changed things dramatically. You know, they say that past is a foreign country. They do things differently there. Well, now we're in a new history of what's being changed. And maybe that does change the focus on what AI sovereignty means to everybody and will be taken a lot more seriously. Which brings us on to the next point. What does this actually mean for CCaaS vendors? And I'd like to draw your thinking to what it means for CCaaS vendors, American CCaaS vendors, and potentially European CCaaS vendors. And not leading the argument, but open for discussion, does this mean that European CCaaS vendors are in a better position?
I think, can I have a go with that one? I think that we need to look at CCaaS as, I think we should broaden that definition, because I'm seeing a lot of CPaaS vendors, European in nature, like Cinch and Infobip, being quite an attractive proposition. They're multi-channel. They've got all the AI smarts. They've got EU jurisdiction. They're EU companies. They're multi-channel. They might not have some of the quality management stuff and the WFM stuff and all the stuff that a big contact center might want. But what we might find is people say we're going to have our whirring lumps of tin, the good old Avaya Definities, or if there's any aspect or Rockwell contact centers out there, or basically premise-based contact centers, and we're going to layer over the top in a hybrid model CPaaS vendors. Or we might do some things that we're concerned about from a regulatory perspective, and we're going to put some of the stuff into the cloud. So all of this cloud or nothing, I think we're going to see disappearing as a result of these sorts of laws. So I think that we shouldn't necessarily think of pure play CCaaS vendors. I think this is wider than that. And I have a feeling that EU vendors have got a bit more of a bit more interest when it comes to things like financial banking and finance, for example, and those high risk sort of areas that will be under the scrutiny of Brussels.
I think. Go on, Don. You were jumping in there.
So I was just going to say. So I think this will lead to something of a renaissance for European IT or cloud or whatever. So, but the European IT community. I mean, if we all go back, 20, 30 years, there was a lot of stuff that was designed, built, developed, which wasn't cloud, wasn't sort of anything necessarily that clever, but the EU was very good at coming up with lots of really unique solutions and innovative solutions. The internet itself per se, that's an EU thing. But the point is that I think because of the reticence around models or platforms from another country and the reliance that are almost 100% reliance on them currently, I think that's going to push a renaissance in local or EU-based platforms. So, if you go to CC Expo or something in a year's time, my guess is you're going to see a lot more EU vendors with a lot more EU stuff that doesn't leave the country sitting there. The problem is a lot of the underpinning technologies and databases and other things may still be US, but the fact is people can move away from that in a heartbeat. There's a lot of innovation here, and I think it's going to be pushing that.
And I love the way you mentioned the underpinning technology, because I think this is a very interesting time to be a service provider. And if we go back, 10 years to the sheer muscle that Cisco's HCS had with service providers and that Avaya had with service providers, there was a lot of, we're going to take it US tech, we're going to deploy it ourselves, we're going to manage it, we're going to own it, And that's actually a very easy way for a US provider to still sell in Europe and be compliant. If you say, I am literally going to give you your own instance of Five9, and you can run it, you can manage it, you can sell it to your customers, and say you're an Orange or you're a BT or you're a Telia or whoever it is. And Telia possibly a bad example given they just sold data to. But Vodafone, yes, exactly that. You can build your own solution with an instance of a US tech and sell that to customers. And then you can still say, look, the US provider does not have access to this. We can air gap it. We can prevent them from having access. So there's then no tension between the US Cloud Act and the EU Data Act, but you're still taking advantage of some of those very capable solutions. Because let's face it, the US have a lot of very capable CCaaS solutions to offer. It's, we talk about European CCaaS, and we have some good solutions, but I do think the US has the edge in terms of scale and capability and volume of provider. So I think for service providers, there's a big opportunity there.
Definitely.
Do you think we'll see the growth then of more consortiums in Europe, looking at the stack of technology and building that out through Europe? Because the reason I'm asking is, hold on a second. The reason I'm asking that is you saw the announcement, I think it was today, with the Open AI Alliance, which is a combination of a lot of US companies coming together as a consortium. The interesting thing is they're all American, right? So we're on the topic of AI sovereignty here and the EU legislation. So does that EU legislation means we're going to be, and to John's point about a renaissance of the European IT industry, does this mean we're going to be driven down a route where we have consortiums of IT providers doing all the different elements of the stack? Tim?
I think so. Yeah, I think so too. And Don, I'll be interested in your thoughts as well. I mean, the interesting thing here is that it doesn't really matter if you turn around and say, oh, we're EU AI Act compliant or we're GDPR compliant or what have you. It's down to the individual people that install these things. So it's not the vendor that's on the hook. It's the people that actually run this stuff. So I think we're going to be faced with this big block until people can get their heads around what it really means for me. Now, it's slowing things down because, I can get my credit card today and I can buy 25 agents of Zoom or 25 agents of WebEx Contact Center or what have you with my credit card, get it installed up and running before 6 o'clock. But that doesn't make me compliant. No. Actually, it doesn't matter in the UK because we're out of the EU. Bad example, if I sat in Germany and I was a German company, then maybe it would do. But I have a feeling it's going to put a big block on things until people get their head around, and consultants, systems integrators, all those professional services will be spinning up these legal and regulatory experts to try and work out what they need to do.
100%. And I think if you look at whether it's the likes of BT or sort of Orange Business or I don't know,
T-Mobile.
There's a whole bunch of them that have huge capabilities and more importantly, infrastructure, data centers, lines, SIP trunks, all the things that you need to make that fly. Suddenly they're sat on a treasure trove of different capabilities and think, hang on, if we build our own, and it does not have to be sort of US rebadged or engineered. And a lot of them have their own systems they used to give, and they gave up and thought, we can't compete with the US. And, to Chris's point, it may not be 100% of what you can get from a US platform, but if it's 90%, given that any platform that you buy, you use about 20% of it anyway.
I think that is part of the reasoning behind the legislation as well. It's that Europe feels that it is behind in those digital capabilities and those hyperscalers capabilities. So there is an element of deliberately making it harder for the US so that Europe is more competitive.
Yeah. On that point, Don and Chris, what I am seeing, I'd be interested in your thoughts as well, is I'm seeing a lot of these professional services organization also going in with cybersecurity professionals to try and say, right, okay, if we're thinking about this correctly, we need to think about the way in which our data is encrypted. So maybe we need to do things like hold your own keys. So basically, if the US Cloud Act suddenly says, I want to pull all this data from this person's server, all they're going to do is get this encrypted blob of rubbish that's useless without the key, and you never had it. That's in the hands of the customer. So the Cloud Act request becomes technically doable, but it's not going to give you what you want because you can't hand over the keys to your door. You can't hand over your keys to the data. So I think professional services are going in with the contact center expert, the person that knows their way around the legal and data jurisdiction sort of areas, and then the cybersecurity professional that can talk about why hold your own keys is really important, why you need to think about this in this way. So I think we're going to see a lot more complex engagements. It's not going to be as easy as your 20 euros handed over to Zoom, Cisco, or any other vendor.
Okay,
but there is,
guys. That's because I'm just conscious of time. I'm going to give you one last question. This will be the closing question. Then we'll take any questions. If anybody on the call has got any questions they'd like to ask this panel, please put them in now so we can answer them in the questions section. But the final closing question is this: what should contact center leaders do right now in preparation for that 2nd of August deadline?
So I think there are a few things. I'll go for one of the first in my mind, and the guys probably know better than me. Inventory and classification. Know what your stuff is, because you need to categorize your AI systems, what you've actually got, what's been sold, map where it goes, map the risk, and identify really where your vendor, what your vendor connects to, and what you're actually doing with the stuff. So a lot of companies probably have some kind of a view, but generally it's not pulled into one place, into sort of a repository where you know what your inventory and classification is of what you're actually doing with AI, especially if there's shadow AI existing in an organization where departments have gone off and go, yeah, this is really cool. And nobody knew they were actually doing it. And I've seen that in a few cases before. So yeah, number one for me is inventory and classify. I'll hand over to the guys.
Tim?
Yeah, so that was a very interesting one from Don, especially around shadow AI. I never really thought about that one. Of course, that's a big loophole. But my two would be get the transparency compliance done before next week. It's days away. Disclose that you've got a chatbot, do your AI content labeling, any sentiment analysis, get all that labeled up. And then also, I think from the data side is ask every CCaaS vendor this sort of very direct jurisdiction question. Who can compel access to this data under what law? And has any vendor had to answer that question? And watch the brakes be applied very quickly when you get the response to that, I think.
So I would wrap up at great points made by Tim and Don. I think I would wrap up by combining a little bit of the feedback that Eric gave. So I think we will see cases. They might be the major ones first, but I think we will see some enforcement sooner or later. And Don, to your point, it will probably be a major provider getting hit, but I think it will also happen as a result probably of a data breach. So when something goes wrong, suddenly there's a whole pile of attention on you. And suddenly then the legislator starts thinking, okay, you know what, we should actually get involved here. So my suggestion is take a look at your cybersecurity. It's a time when cybersecurity is tougher than ever. I mean, look at what happened when one of OpenAI's models got a little bit loose and went and hacked Hugging Face. We have AI capabilities that, yeah, that can, and it's, there are challenges where it's both the human and the technical. So you can, as a scammer, get a spell checked, much more reasonable looking email out if you want to phish. It's data breaches are very much more a risk for businesses, and there's also with the AI Act more of a risk to you if it happens. So it's higher impact and higher risk means you need to rethink how much focus you're putting on cybersecurity.
Great answer. Chris. So I can't see many other questions in the chat. James, have I missed any questions there? Is there anything that we should be answering? Yes.
No, there's lots of great conversation.
I'm sorry, Eric sort of, as we were thinking, when Eric was sort of saying, and we were sort of, a metaphor really for all of this is, if you're going hell for leather, sorry, down the motorway and you have an accident, police are going to look at your speed. Think of that like the data breach. You know, once you've got a data breach, people will be looking at that and thinking, were they GDPR compliant? No, they weren't. Okay, big fine. That's the way that I'm thinking about it now.
Excellent. That's a great analogy to end on. I'd like to thank all of our panel today, Chris, Tim, Don, James, for helping out in the background there. Any questions about this, or if you need any help with this, make sure you reach out to Gaia, and our squad of consultants are always happy to help you. Any of the guys on here or any people at Gaia always are willing to help and assist you in any support you need for compliance, for cybersecurity, for any kind of work on this respect. So wish you a good day and have a great rest of your week. See you. Bye.